going on, all you minties? Uncanny Omar here from Near Mint Condition, the home of collected editions. And join me for my overview of the Sandman Mystery Theatre Compendium Volume 1 from DC Comics. So, stay tuned. Alright, what we're looking at here is the very first compendium of Sandman Mystery Theatre. If you've been watching my channel for a while now, you know that this was one of my most wanted stories to be collected in omnibus or absolute format. But DC has decided to go the compendium route, which this is the home of collected editions. I don't mind. As long as it's collected, people will be reading it for the first time, and we'll be looking at the build here in a little bit. But it makes me so damn happy to actually have this now on my bookshelf. There were trades available, and then I think they did a couple of like big book editions, but each one of those was discontinued because of sales. So I'm here to talk about Sandman Mystery Theatre. I'm going to be talking about the stories collected in here, showing off the artwork, and hopefully talking some of you into getting this book, because we definitely need a volume 2, but it's such a good series. To me, it was up there with Neil Gaiman's Sandman, and I know that's a huge statement to make, but it was. This series was so good, but I will say, don't expect Neil Gaiman's Sandman here. This is a completely different story starring the original Sandman, Wesley Dodds, which we'll get to in a little bit. The very first thing I want to do, though, this is a compendium for people that aren't familiar with what that means. It is a softcover collection. It is the size of a trade paperback. For example, here it is next to an Epic collection. These are as long and as tall as the Epic collections. Of course, this is thicker because it contains 30. This one here contains 37 issues worth of stuff. So it is a little bit shorter than your omnibus editions or deluxe hardcovers. And of course, the big difference being that this is a soft cover and the art is on board, whereas these usually have a dust jacket. So let's shift the focus back to this collection here. So you have the Sandman Universe Classic, Sandman Mystery Theatre Compendium 1. You do have this label up here, which is what DC has been doing with books like Lucifer or books like Books of Magic. They're putting the Sandman Universe Classics because there is a new universe of Sandman too. Sandman Mystery Theatre Compendium Volume 1. And here is Wesley Dodds right there. Forwarded by Patton Oswalt, the DC Black Label instead of the Burger books. Matt Wagner, Stephen T. Seagle, and Guy Davis getting the top billing. I love this spine right here. I know, please ignore the fact that it's opening up. I read the whole thing. And I do want to show again that the spine doesn't have a crease on it. So meaning these books are either being built better or maybe I just need to reread it about 10 more times. But Sandman Mystery Theatre Compendium 1. I don't know. There's just something beautiful about this. I love the look of Wesley right there with his gun and his creepy mask. Wagner, Seagle, Davis, and then the DC label. Not Black Label, but it's just the DC logo. Pleasant Dreams and another creepy ear. I always thought the covers were so creepy about the series. And then what is collected in here, the retail price being $59.99, and the ISBN right there. Alright, so we're going to dive into this world of Wesley Dodds, what it was like to be a superhero, if you will, in 1938. So that's when all this takes place, 1938-39. And talk about the creators and how all this got started too. I will be talking about some of the cases, not each one, not going into details, not talking about the revelations or anything like that. But just in case, maybe minor spoilers for what this is, but I figure most of you are here because you want to know what Sandman Mystery Theatre is about. But just in case if you don't want to know anything, put me on mute. Check out the beautiful artwork in here. Alright, let's get started. Okay, let's go ahead and crack this book open. There's no end paper because the end sheets don't need to be connected to, glued to this board, the front board or the back board. Sandman Mystery Theatre Compendium 1, right there, and a picture by Guy Davis. I love the way that he portrays the character, or he draws rather, the character of Wesley Dodds. And here's the creators, Matt Wagner, Stephen T. Seagle, and the artist, Guy Davis, of course, doing most of the book in here. He does most of the arcs in here. And John Watkins, you'll see names in here like Alex Ross, who only draws about like 5 pages of the book, but it's Alex Ross. You have to throw him in there. David Horning and David Lloyd doing some of the coloring and the lettering right here by John Costanza, and your table of contents. And there's a forward by Patton Oswalt, which we'll talk about here in a second, and then how each of the stories is breaking down and where you're going to find each of these story arcs. The cool thing about Sandman Mystery Theater, all the way up until, well, I think the last 2 issues, is that each of the stories are broken down by 4 issues. So every 4 issues, there's a new story arc. And you can almost go into it without having read the previous volume, but you don't want to, because you want to follow the character of Diane. And I'll talk more about her in a few. But here is your introduction by Patton Oswalt, talking about books that are comparing this to series like Deadwood or The Wire, talking about shows that got canceled way before they should have been canceled, and how we never got a true ending, but that kind of makes them really special. I guess he must not have watched the Deadwood movie. That wrapped up a lot of things. But then talking about the characters in here that you're going to find, particularly one that is kind of problematic because of the times, because this took place around 1938. Some of the cameos you might see through here, he does talk a little bit about that. And yeah, well, let's go ahead and get started. So kicking it off with issue number 1, I want to say that this was one of the early titles that had the Vertigo logo on it, because there was the Death, the High Cost of Living. I think that was the first miniseries with the Vertigo logo, and then this was one of the earlier titles too. So here we start off with a nightmare, and it's Wesley Dodds dreaming about maybe World War I or a bunch of bodies just coming together, but there's a narration too, which I'll talk a little bit about here in a second. But we get to meet the character of Diane. This is Diane Belmont, and she lives with her dad, who's a district attorney. And her dad runs into this mysterious character with a gun. Turns out to be just a sleep gun that puts you to sleep. And this World War I gas mask that makes him look really creepy. He wears a fedora, and he wears a trench coat. And what exactly is he doing in this house? So the first story arc is known as the Tarantula, as you can see like by going back here. So the Tarantula is 4 issues, and oh yes, unless noted, this was all written by Matt Wagner and Stephen T. Seagle. However, it will let you know when Matt Wagner is the only writer on the book. So this is all written by Matt Wagner. Now, Matt Wagner, of course, had already put a name out there for himself, both at DC and Marvel, but came from the independent world. Like he did that Mage, right? Which we're still waiting on the 3rd Mage story. Anyway, so the Tarantula is where we get to meet our characters. We get to meet Diane Belmont. We get to meet Wesley Dodds coming back, taking over his dad's business. And it doesn't really get too detailed as to what his dad did, but his dad knew all these people. He knew all these judges. He knew all these people at this party. He knew the district attorney. And we also see that Diane has a friend named Catherine. And Catherine ends up getting kidnapped by this character known as the Tarantula. And the Tarantula is torturing these women, and so it's not just Catherine. And the Tarantula wants something specific from Catherine. So you can find out. It gets into some mature territory in here with the violence and some of the language and even some of the storylines in here. So this is where you see the kind of character that Diane is. And there are narration boxes. And I love the narration boxes because they're like journal entries from either Wesley Dodds, or in the next story arc, we'll see Diane's journal entries. But even though they have nothing to do with the actual story that's going on, with what the crime is, you expect to see a little bit of that in there. They don't. They kind of throw you off a little bit. Not really as a red herring, but kind of give you a false sense of security, because he's talking about coming back home, taking over his dad's business. But nothing really about the actual crime that's happening with these women being kidnapped. And the second story arc, so this story arc right here is about a bunch of violent murders, about a couple of gangs. This one is not drawn by Guy Davis. And here you get to find out a little bit about Wesley Dodds and where he came from and how he may have gotten some of his training, because he talks about living in the Orient. Keep in mind, this is supposed to take place in 1938. So a lot of the language and dialogue will seem outdated, like things we don't use anymore. So you have to keep that in mind. A lot of the accents, too. There is a particular character here that shows a lot of bigotry, one of the police officers, and it's interesting to see how even that character ends up getting developed later on. He starts off as a minor character, and then he just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So that's what the second story arc is. The Brood is another storyline that's drawn by Gavin Wilson, and it's pretty much depicting this uh, powerful person that is manipulating and torturing people around him, and has a couple of secrets. Then we get back to Guy Davis drawing the Vamp. By now, Stephen T. Seagle has come on board and helping write these stories. Now, the Vamp is all about a friend of Diane's who has come back into her life. Her name is Carol, and she seems to think that Carol's acting a little bit weird, and so are the rest of Carol's friends. So she goes on herself and investigates what exactly is going on. And to me, that is the beauty of this book, is that while you see the covers, while the name is Sandman Mystery Theater, this is about Diane Belmont. It's less about Wesley Dodds and more about Diane as a character and how she progresses from this this girl that just goes out to parties. She's a little bit of a socialite, and how she becomes almost like a private investigator. I don't want to even say a sidekick to Wesley Dodds, because she's not a love interest at first, even though they knew each other from the past. But they get reintroduced through a party, and she casts, she keeps an eye on. He definitely has her eye. As a matter of fact, her first meeting with Sandman takes place when she's just using the restroom here at the courthouse, and she sees Sandman, who she thinks is the serial killer, the tarantula that's going around killing women. But later on, you see that she wants to be more and more part of that world and less this socialite. So that's the beauty of this book, is that it's not just about Wesley Dodds. It's about Diane Belmont. And I think that's what a lot of people really enjoyed about this. You have this strong character, and her character arc is so good. Now, if you've read the Golden Age stuff, if you've read even the All-Star Squadron, you may know where the story is going because of what happens with Wesley Dodds or what happens with Diane Belmont. Here's the thing, though. This was during the Vertigo imprint, so this could really be taken as an alternate reality on what happened to these characters. However, a lot of this stuff has been used later on as part of canon, kind of like Neil Gaiman's Sandman was part of the Vertigo universe, but a lot of that stuff, most of it to this day, is still used as canon for the DC universe. And that's the way that this feels too. So this is pretty much what the art looks like. You're going to get a lot of this sketchy type of artwork, but I love the way that it makes me feel. Let's look at the annual, because the annual is the one that has a lot of different creators in here, like David Lloyd, and this is where you're going to find Alex Ross and Dean Ornstrom. And Guy Davis is is an artist whose work I've enjoyed, and I completely forgot until I reread this how much Guy Davis there was in early Vertigo, or in Sandman Mystery Theater, because I'm sure most people are familiar with Guy Davis through the pages of Hellboy, and then Dean Ormstrom, of course, co-creating the Black Hammer world with Jeff Lemire. Here's some Alex Ross pages. Just imagine how beautiful that would be in oversized format. Not that Guy Davis's art or anybody else's art would not be beautiful in oversized format. So there are some things that Matt Wagner and Stephen T. Seagle decided to retcon as far as the characters of Wesley Dodds and the character of Diane Belmont. And I think most people probably appreciated it just because of the way that her character was treated. So if you've read nothing but the Golden Age Sandman stuff, or even if you read the All-Star Squadron, then this might feel a little bit different. As a matter of fact, Wesley Dodds. I remember reading, I think it was the first archive. They might have released more. Wesley Dodds in here feels like your everyman. He's not your best looking guy. You know, he's a little pudgy. He's having he's combing his hair back. He's only like 25, 26 years old at the time. And he's not like the best looking. But then again, Diane isn't your stereotypical damsel in distress either. And the way she looks doesn't really fit that mold of what these characters in your head were supposed to look like. But I think one of the biggest changes was done to Wesley, because Wesley he's very empathetic and he feels bad for a lot of these horrible things that are happening to people, which is why he decides to put on the mask and fight crime. And he doesn't look like Bruce Wayne. So he's not like a playboy like Bruce Wayne. And they really put that in here. They let you know that he is the opposite of Bruce Wayne. He's kind of the outcast. He's the type of person that not a lot of people talk to, which is what I think Diane finds really interesting about him. So the cases get dark, and I mean, there's a couple in here that get really dark, like Hannibal Lecter kind of dark in here. Now, this taking place in 1938, are you going to see any kind of superheroes in here? Well, one of the storylines, if you paid attention to the table of contents, let's just go back to that so you can see, is called The Hour Man. So on page 788, so there are page numbers, is where you're going to find the beginning of The Hour Man. And this recreates a new meeting between two of the original Golden Age JSA members, Wesley Dodds and Rex Tyler. And Rex Tyler is Hour Man. So it is a little bit of a retcon. And, you know, Rex isn't exactly the type of character like he was in the Golden Age. So he's a little bit different. But it's really cool to see the beginnings of what will later become the JSA, the Justice Society of America. I love it. Now, the story ends up with the Python, or ends with the Python. That's the last story that's collected in here. And are there any extras? There are just a couple. And it's mainly posters, or right here's an illustrated version of the cover art to the Tarantula Volume 1. And then a couple of other cover concepts. This book right here has 981 pages. Again, retailing for $59.99. And I'm sure the other question that I'm going to get is, does Morpheus show up in here? Is there a crossover between Sandman, Neil Gaiman's Sandman, and Wesley Dodds Sandman? There has to be a connection. Well, yes. I mean, there is, but can't tell you where and when. But yeah, there's definitely a little bit of a connection, in particular one story. Now, this being a compendium means that it is glued binding. Here is what it looks like when you open it up. I mean, when you lay it flat, right? And this is something I've talked about on my channel before. Like, you know, I have this fear, because it has happened with some of my compendiums, where the spine will end up cracking or creasing. But I've read this cover to cover just to go back and reread and revisit, rather. And there's no crease on it. So that's nice. And I wasn't the most careful, because I like testing these things out. I'm sure some of you all remember the way that the Spawn Compendium Volume 2 cracked in the middle after just one read through. So, and of course, every copy might be different. You know, somebody could be watching right now going, man, my spine came crease. I didn't even open it up. So, but that's what this is. That's what Sandman Mystery Theater is. It's one of my favorite books. I love the way that this is structured. I love the way that the narration boxes throw you off from what the actual story is. I love the character development with Diane. I think she's one of the best characters written in comics. And I love Wesley. Like, it really made me fall in love with these characters. So when they appeared later on in the pages of Jeff Johns or James Robinson's JSA, I was like, yeah, I know those guys. Or whenever there was that crossover with the Sandman. But if you've never read it, I think you owe it to yourself to check it out, if this type of stuff interests you, right? I mean, sometimes this stuff is too violent, sometimes this stuff is too noirish, and that's what you'll get here. I will say, yes, it's supposed to take place in 1938, but there's something about Guy Davis's artwork that makes me think less 1930s and more like a little bit of like Alan Moore's League, or even From Hell. Just almost like this late 1800s feel to it. But that's it. Yeah, this does open up, by the way. There's no stopping that. That, as they say, is that. If you're interested in purchasing this book, don't forget to check out our sponsor, cheapgraphicnovels.com, your online home for graphic novels and collected editions up to 50% off cover price. They have excellent shipping and prompt and helpful service. Check out their bargain deals for up to 90% off cover price. And don't forget that CGN also takes pre-orders. That way you don't miss out on the hottest releases. And they are currently running a special promotion for you Minties. If you're a first-time customer, after receiving your order confirmation email, reply back to that email and let them know Near Mint Condition sent you their way. They will then apply a free shipping promotional credit to your next order in the US. Cheap Graphic Novels, your source for the hottest books with the kind of deep discount, quality shipping, and customer service that will keep you coming back for more. And that was the content, the page count, and build of this compendium. Let me know in the comments down below if you are picking this up, if you're hoping that they'll do a hardcover, deluxe hardcover, or an omnibus, or an absolute edition of this series. I would love to know all those answers, so you can leave them in the comment section. If you have any questions, leave them down below. And if you have thoughts on this series, what did you think of this series? Was it as good as Neil Gaiman's Sandman? Was it better? Or if you've never read it, leave those comments down below, smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications. Check out our Patreon and Spreadshop. Amazing ways to support the channel if you can do so. More importantly, all of you stay healthy and safe out there. Much love.